Hi, and welcome to the Writing Lounge. I am Allison Freyberg. I'm professor of communication and cultural studies in the School of Business at the University of Redlands. And today in the Writing Lounge, it's presentations that deliver. This is actually a re-recording of the live webinar that happened earlier today. And here we go. A little bit about the Writing Lounge for those of you who aren't familiar. Essentially, it's a very casual space where every 2 weeks I give a small presentation on some sort of writing topic, and we handle questions and we get some tips from everybody, and we just see what kind of strategies we can put forward to get past some stumbling blocks in our writing and communication endeavors. So if you want to find out what's coming up in the Writing Lounge, just go to redlands.edu/writing lounge. You can always contact me as well. This is a little bit about me. And you can reach me by email. You can connect with me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. And we can talk about the Writing Lounge. You can gain access to other Writing Lounge webinars, and you can see what's upcoming. So I encourage you to drop by the Writing Lounge or connect with me and figure out what's coming up. As I said, I'm professor of communication and cultural studies. I teach leadership communication and a consulting course, and I'm also the associate director of our study abroad courses for working professionals. So you can always contact me to talk about that as well. And with that, here we go into today's topic. Presentation phobias. I always like to start off by, just getting a sense of where people are and where are the trouble areas. So usually what I hear about presentations from students is, number one, they're worried about the tech failing. Number two, they're worried that their audience will lose interest. Or I'll sound boring, I'm nervous, right? Or number four, I'm not confident about my subject matter, I won't know the answers, everything will be ruined. These are probably the four most common things I hear. So what we're going to do is try to figure out how to alleviate those, some strategies to get beyond them. And here are some keys to successful presentations. Number one, we're going to talk about developing an overall strategy. Number two, we're going to talk about ways of reducing your anxiety, calming your nerves. It's very uncomfortable to give presentations a lot of the time, and there are even more complications now that we do so many of them virtually. So let's think about ways to reduce anxiety a little bit. We're going to talk about honing your message and really being clear about what you need to say. We're going to introduce some strategies to organize so that what you have to say will have an impact. And lastly, we'll deal a little bit with designing slides. There is a whole other writing lounge that deals with designing slides, and I invite you to that session, or if you're interested in getting a recording of that session, just let me know. Okay? But we think of slides in terms of the overall presentation as a component of presentations, not as the whole thing. So these 5 categories will move us forward. So here we go. Developing an overall strategy. The first thing you need to do is captivate your audience. You need to get their attention and keep their attention and get them engaged. You need to clarify your message. What are you trying to say? And make sure that's really clear. And you need to give your audience a chance to say yes to your idea. Those are the 3 things you need to do in a presentation: captivate, clarify, and create a yes. I'd like to say it was more than that, but it really isn't. So let's see how we build that. I think we build it on 3 pillars. And when all else fails, we just think of those three pillars. One, your audience. Your presentation doesn't matter unless your audience matters. Your message, because that's what you want your audience to understand. And yourself. That's it. Audience, message, and you. Everything else is extra. Let's see what we do from that. Reducing anxiety. I've been teaching for 35 years. I still get nervous every time I teach. Okay? Every time I talk in front of people, I get nervous. So I try to introduce a few techniques that will just help us calm down a little bit, make it manageable. And the first thing I like to talk about are your strengths. What characterizes you, first of all, as a presenter? If we were in class right now, what I'd have you do was write down 5 words that describe you as a presenter. You wouldn't share them with anybody. They're just words. When you think of yourself as a presenter, these are the words you associate with that. And I'd have you write that down. And in fact, if you want to do this, you should do this right now. Just think of 5 words that characterize you as a presenter. Then I would have you look over that list and start to notice which ones would be considered negative and which ones would be considered positive attributes. One thing I have noticed over the years is that people's negative lists are usually much longer than their positive lists. We think we're weaker in a lot of areas than we are stronger. And that's the first thing to note, is that we tend to be drawn to our weaknesses. Now, what I have people do, let's say you had 3 negatives and 2 positive traits. What I would have you do next is just either delete those negatives or cross them out, depending if you've written them on a screen or on a piece of paper. Just cross them out, get rid of them, make them disappear. Because I want us to consider focusing on making your strengths stronger. What are we always thinking about? We are always thinking about our weaknesses and how we can get a little better at something we're really weak at. How can we get less bad at something? Well, what if we just forgot about that and figured out what we were really good at and then got even stronger in that area? What would happen if we made our strengths stronger? And I'll tell you one thing that happens is that we get a little calmer about presenting because we've reframed our thinking. We're not always thinking about the bad stuff. We're trying to think of the good stuff and make the good stuff better. So we have just a different orientation, a different disposition towards our presentations. What are you good at? How does that make you feel? That's step 1. Step 2, I have a few techniques just to, again, kind of calm the nerves a little bit. As I said, I still, after 35 years, still get nervous talking to a crowd. And it's not going to stop. So I use these techniques. First one, pretty simple. Few deep breaths. Just calm yourself down. Take a minute to do 6 deep breaths, and you'll be surprised how calm you can get. And that's probably an obvious one, but how many times have you really done it before you have to present? Or on the opposite end of that, one thing I suggest is, and it sounds kind of odd, but do something a little scary about 20 minutes before you have to present. And the reason I suggest this is because when you're presenting, all that adrenaline's going and cortisol's going and all that stuff's going on in you, and you're trying to present, you're trying to do two things at once. You're trying to manage your anxiety, your adrenaline, and you're trying to present. Well, I'm a big fan of making sure you're not doing two things at once when you're trying to present. So if your adrenaline's going to get going, why not get it going a little before your presentation? For example, back in the, when we were teaching in person, and hopefully one day we'll be back there again, I, I always get nervous, as I said. So my office tends to be across the hall. My office is across the hall from the dean's office. So what I would do at about 5:30, I usually teach at 6, is I would poke my head into the dean's office and, have a little conversation because that's something that scares me just a little bit. It doesn't have to be something very scary, just something that, scares you a little bit. And then by the time, so I'd get all worked up, and then about 20 minutes later, I'd just be settling down and I would coast into class, and it feels really good. So if there's something you can do that can just get your adrenaline going half hour beforehand, you can calm down by the time you need to present, and you're not doing two things at once. The third thing I would recommend, and this is very much in line with the last thing in terms of not doing two things at once, get familiar with your space. And that can be a 3D space in a presentation room. That can be this virtual space. Get used to where your camera is. Get used to where your keyboard is. Get used to in class or a conference room where the projector is. Is the light going to get in your eyes? Is there reflection off the window? What happens when you see people's feet moving below the desks in front of you? Don't let those things surprise you when you are presenting because it's the first time you see that stuff when you're presenting. Instead, visit the conference room or the classroom and be exactly where you're going to be to present and see what happens. See where the edges of the table are so you don't run into them. If you're doing a virtual presentation, make sure if your camera slips and it's clipped onto your laptop, make sure it's not going to do that. Make sure you have your angles right. Make sure you know how to share your screen, all those kinds of things so that you're not trying to learn that while you're trying to present. Again, one thing at a time, and you'll be able to manage your anxiety a little better. The fourth one is one that I actually hear from students that it really, really works. How many times do we play the what if game? What if the tech fails? What if I spill have a nice cup of coffee here. What if I spill my drink? What if the camera goes off? What if I can't share my screen? What if, right? And we just keep asking the what if questions, and then we get all worked up, and then we can't present. If you're going to play the what if game, go ahead and answer those questions. Right? Don't just ask the question, answer them. Okay, so I have my coffee and I spill it. Well, okay, what's going to happen? It's probably, if it spills and the cup doesn't break, well, then, I don't know, coffee's on my tile floor. It's okay. It can wait a little bit. That's fine. Well, if I spill it and my coffee cup does break, well, I'm just going to have to say, hang on, everybody, for a second. Let's take a 2-minute break so I can take care of this little disaster, and we'll get back to things after that. You just answer the questions. Don't just leave them as questions, because if you leave them as questions, they're going to make you much more nervous than if you just visualized answering them. What happens if this happens? Figure it out so that when it does happen, and it always happens, it's okay. You've already gone through what's going to happen. And the fifth technique is actually creating an audience profile, and I want to take a little bit of a deeper dive into this. So this is actually inspired from Nancy Duarte's Guide to Persuasive Presentations. It's a great book, highly recommend it. And then the final slide here, I'll have all these resources and where you can find them. The best thing to calm yourself down about presenting is to stop thinking about yourself. It's hard because you're nervous, but if you start thinking about your audience instead of yourself, things will calm down. Number one, it makes you realize your audience is just people. They have so many things they're thinking about, so many things that are running through their mind. And you can realize, wait a minute, why are they there? What do you want them to do? What do they like? My favorite, what keeps them up at night? When I start thinking about the audience in this way, I'm really getting a sense of them as people, and two, getting a sense of why they might be at my presentation. What interests them? What might engage them? What might be the best way to reach them? I'm thinking about them instead of thinking about myself. And I calm down. And it also, an audience profile will really help you tailor your presentation as well, because you're thinking about how it's going to be received. So those are the three things I think can help reduce your anxiety. Focus on your strengths, identify them, find out what they are, figure out ways to get even stronger. Use those 5 techniques to try to calm your fears a little bit. In particular, give you a chance to not do 2 things at once or to be surprised while you're presenting. And 3, do this audience profile so you can focus on your audience and your message instead of yourself so much. All right, honing the message. What you have to say never should be distinct from the people you're saying it to. It's always about your audience. They're always connected, your message and your audience. Okay. And this is, again, from Duarte's Persuasive Presentations, although the examples are mine. But the concept is hers, and I think it's really helpful. Your message should have a point of view and articulate what's at stake for the audience. So a point of view, that's your perspective about what needs to happen. What do you want people to be able to do? What do you think they should do? What's your presentation about? What do you want them to say yes to? What's at stake is, why does this matter to the audience? And you need to articulate your message in terms of that. So what does this look like? Here's an example. Here's a first example. Let's say you're talking about organizational leadership, and the message you want to tell organizational leaders in your audience is that they need to understand the experiences of independent workers across specialties. Well, in order for your audience to accept that message, you can't just articulate it in terms of your needs as a presenter or your point of view. If I did that, it would look something like this. Hey, as organizational leaders, you must do more to learn what the people you hire experience in their fields and working lives. Okay, so that articulates your point of view as a presenter. But as an organizational leader in your audience, I'm going to fold my arms and the hair on my neck's going to stand up, and I'm just going to be like, you want me to do what? No. Why? I'm just going to do more stuff? You're going to get a lot of pushback. You're going to get a lot of resistance. If, however, you revise that message to incorporate what's at stake for your audience, you change the tone. And here's what you would get. As organizational leaders, you'll struggle to create productive, vibrant working environments until you understand the day-to-day experiences of the people you hire. And there, your audience goes, wow, I'm going to struggle. This is unless this kind of stuff happens. Well, I don't want to struggle. So maybe I'll listen to what this person has to say. It's just a reframing in terms of what's at stake for the audience. Here's another example. This one, the topic is flex work at Nifty Products Limited. In case it's not painfully obvious, I have made up all the examples. The message you need to send is Nifty Products needs to establish clear, consistent definitions of flex work. I actually think a lot of organizations are going to be doing that in the days ahead. Your point of view as a presenter, what your message in terms of how you conceive it might be flex work at Nifty Products needs to be defined by each department in terms of location option and time parameters. Now, your audience of organizational leaders, again, are going to fold their arms and they're just going to say, stop telling me what to do. Right? I know how to do this. I've been doing this. You're coming in here for an hour and telling me what to do? No. If you reframe in terms of what's at stake for them, you change the tone. And that might look something like this. Until each department clearly defines and communicates flex work in terms of time and location, employees will assume it means working from home. Now the audience of organizational leaders goes, oh, that might not be what we want people to assume. I want to make sure people are clear about this. Okay, I'll listen to you. What do you have to say? Now, I'm not guaranteeing that clarifying your message in terms of what's at stake for the audience will always work, but it will give you the best chance of creating that yes, because it shows you're considering your audience, that your message is there for the audience. Okay. Next is organizing for impact. I have a few techniques to introduce. The first thing I want to talk about is leading your audience forward. You know, getting them towards your message. And this is from Duarte. I'll have a quote from her next as well. You always are going to explain how things are, especially in a persuasive presentation, right? And you're also going to explain how things could be. That's the point of you presenting. You're doing your pitch, you're introducing your solution, you're outlining a problem so that you can introduce a solution. So you need to be clear about what is and what could be. And your job in leading the audience forward is to emphasize the contrast between what is and what could be. Duarte calls this amplifying the gap between what is and what could be. In other words, what can you leverage to make this gap seem really visible and to help guide people towards the what could be? And this is what Duarte says. She says, all good presentations, like all good stories, convey and resolve some kind of conflict or imbalance. The sense of discord is what makes audiences care enough to get on board. And that's that discord between what is and what could be. Now, here's an example. Here's the what is. I think you all can see my yellow halo here. I wrote this sentence to describe what is. In this case, you know, I teach in the School of Business, and let's just say the International Business course provides a textbook history of successful companies and the practices they've employed. Okay, that's correct, but I've done nothing to make that attractive, have I? I've used really dull words like textbook, history, really vague words like successful in companies. I have no idea what companies we're talking about. I have no idea what successes are. And more vagueness with practices employed. I mean, what practices? I don't know about you, but I don't want to do this. I even used, what did I use? I used Arial font and I didn't set it off in any way. I mean, it's easy to read, but that's all I did, right? So that's what is. Here's what could be. On my Redlands study abroad, I'm going to network with entrepreneurs in Croatia, visit blockchain startups in Slovenia, and shadow a wine explorer in Italy. Wine exporter, not explorer. Um, Here's what I have done to make what could be more attractive, to lead my audience towards the what could be. I've used very concrete nouns, Redlands, study abroad, Croatia, Slovenia, Italy, wine. I've used very active verbs like shadow and network. And I've even used visual cues. Like I've popped those nouns and verbs out in red. I've used a more interesting font that's still very, very readable. I've put it in a window of white so it pops off the background image. And look at that, I've even used the background image with the Game of Thrones person here jumping from this side to this side. So I'm leading you this way. I have done everything I can to want you to be here and to leave here. I have amplified the gap between what is and what could be. And that's using your skills with language and with design to be able to lead your audience towards your message. So there's that example. I also encourage you to use basic storytelling techniques. Think about what good stories have. Well, actually, if we take a second back and we think, you know what most people do in presentations? They fill slides with information and then they yammer that information to their audiences. There's nothing compelling about that. Nothing at all. Stories are always compelling. And you can clarify your message by inviting people into this story. Think about what good stories have, right? There's a journey. You're going from someplace to someplace. How are you going to go? How are you going to get there? There's heroes and villains. Now, I'm not so sure you want to talk too much about the villains, but the idea is who should we be rooting for? Where's the obstacle? How can you get people on board? How can you get people identifying with the problem and the project and the people involved? Stories always have some sort of conflict, right? And or a contrast in perspectives. Well, introduce that. Don't shy away from it, because then you'll get the wonderful payoff of resolving that conflict. And a lot of storytelling has some surprise, something unexpected. There's a turn. Where is it? Why is it? Can you draw the audience to it? Now, these are not deep storytelling techniques. They're all techniques that we know. They're techniques that we use when we're talking to friends. And they're techniques you can use in professional presentations. Very simple techniques. And look at this. I even built it into the slide here. Look at that. Do you see that person? She's down at the, this is actually on the global consultancy in last year that I took students on. We put students on a team, and these students are in Trieste, Italy, and they were consulting with a wine exporter in Italy. And we were walking around up at the castle one day for a little break, and I saw this person walking down the road, and I thought, oh, that's a beautiful picture. And I start wondering, I get the story, right? I start thinking, hey, who is that? What's she carrying? Where's she going? Where's she come from? What's bothering her today? What's keeping her up at night? You know, story is everywhere. It's implied everywhere. So make it work for you. And the last thing I want to get to is some basic principles for designing slides. Again, slides are just one component of the entire experience of presenting. We do have, as I said, another writing lounge completely on designing captivating slides. But for now, I want to see them in the role that they are. They're helpful, but they're not the presentation. Okay. But here are some basic principles. Oh, look at this. Okay, I think we can agree this is the worst slide ever. There's all the colors are in it, and I can't read anything. And there's a million pieces of information. Oh, by the way, I added this in. It means nothing to me, as it should mean nothing to you, because it's just more stuff, and this is terrible. Nobody can see it, and if they can see it, then they're going to be looking at all the little pieces of information on it, and they're not going to be listening to you. So this is a terrible slide, worst slide ever. If you decide to use slides, here are some basic design principles. One idea per slide. That's it. One idea per slide. Again, if you pack your slides full of information, your audience is going to be looking at the slide and not listening to you, especially now when we're working virtually and there's so many distractions. One idea, one slide, people will listen to what you have to say more. If all of the information is on your slide and you have a big document that's just a bunch of words that's all, that says everything, it's not a slide deck. It's a document. Go ahead and make a PDF of it and send it to people. If possible, people should get your slide in about 3 seconds. Maybe 4, maybe 5, and there's always exceptions to this. But the idea is if they take just a few seconds to look at your slide and digest it, then they'll be listening to you and what you have to say. This is a tough one, right? How many of you rely on bullet points? And this isn't just a design issue. The reason why you shouldn't rely on those bullet points is because 99 times out of 100, those text bullet points are just a script for you. They're not about the audience. They don't help the audience in any way. They don't help the audience feel anything. They don't help the audience really understand anything. You might as well have just sent the slides to them. They don't need you. Reframe your slides in terms of how they're going to help the audience, not how they're going to provide memory joggers for you. Banish bullet points. You'll notice there hasn't been a single bullet point in this deck. And each slide should tell a tiny story. And I'm going to tell you a little story that made me realize this, because most of the things I learn are because I've failed monstrously at things. So I was teaching our consultancy course, and we do mock cases before we put people into teams to visit the company and work with the company. And I said, okay, stop with all the bullet points and just endless text. That's not helping. Reduce your words. You have way too many words all over your slides. So the students, trying to take it seriously, responded. And what happened in their mock cases is I would get these slides with just a few random words on them. And it meant I had no idea what those words meant. No one in the audience had any idea what those words meant, because even though the students took away all the words that they left were still there to jog their own memories as presenters. They weren't there to create any meaning for the audience. So that's why I thought, oh, wait, we still need to realize that every slide needs to tell a tiny story. So there needs to be a directive for the audience. In this case, each slide should tell a tiny story. So tell a tiny story is the story here. If I just read that, I will have received a message. But if I just see random words on a slide, that has nothing to do with the audience. This is also from Duarte, but a different book called Slideology. Now, so here's the story of this slide, right? The story is use contrast to guide people to your point. So I'm still telling the audience a message, but I'm visualizing the rest of it. So in this case, you want to guide people's eyes to what you want them to see on your slides. So you can do that by making something different in size. So my eye is going to be drawn there. Making something different in shape. My eye is going to be drawn there. Making something different in shade. My eye will be drawn there. You'll notice that I tend to use a pop color to draw your attention to something. And, or you can, put it out of location. I have a very hard time having that be out of location like that. I like things being in little rows. But the idea is, what are you going to tell your audience to look at on your slide? Because if you let them determine where they're going to look, you've lost them. As you're building slides, as you're designing them, and ask yourself, when was the last time you actually designed a slide rather than put one together? What you try to do is use a simple photographer's tool, which is the grid system. This is the 3x3 rule, right? Notice everything's divided into thirds, right? And what you want to do is put stuff at the intersections or along those lines. There and there. And look what we did here. So I formatted the background with this one picture. And so here's the guy's head. Here's his shoulder. There's the microphone. And I had nothing here, so that became a great spot to add the directive for the little story for the slide. Use a grid system to compose the slide. And now we've got a nice composed picture, a nice composed slide, things in the quadrants. You get a sense of balance, and it's visually appealing that way. And there's a singular unified message to it. So basic rule of thirds in photography, you can have a look at that. You do want to choose a palette, right? Now I'm using Redlands colors, so we got the maroon, the white, the gray, and the two grays, and a little bit of black. I added a little pop color, as you know, with my orange. So that helps me guide eyes a little bit. But you don't want to, you don't want 8, 9, 10, 12 colors because you're not getting any consistency. You're distracting people rather than helping them focus. You want to choose fonts that eyes like. And let me tell you, you may be able to see that 8-point font. I can't. Make it a big font. Usually make it for slides a sans serif font. That's the one without the little tails. And make it bigger than you think. Make it pop from the page. Make it easy to see. Make it bigger than you think it needs to be. Okay, because you don't know what screens people are looking at this on, and you don't know what their abilities are to see things. Okay, having alternate text also helps. Choose fonts that eyes like. Build a photo and icon library. Okay, so I find the photos, I find them from a few places. I use Unsplash a lot. I use my own photography from our study abroad and consultancy courses. That picture of the woman going down from the castle, that was my photo. Pexels is good, and the Noun Project is really good as well for free high resolution photos. And what I do, I download some of them and I create a library so I have easy access to them and find them easily. I can build my slides and it doesn't take that long. Okay. Also for icons, Icon Finder is really good. And if you use PowerPoint, the online version of PowerPoint has icons you can insert. But Icon Finder, you just click the free filter and there's a whole bunch of stuff there. Now we'll talk a little bit about data and that'll round us out here. I see so often people just filling up their slides with all sorts of raw data and it's just filling the page. right? It's fill in the slide. Well, that's not helpful because, again, what's going to happen is people are going to start wandering around, getting lost in your slide, and because you've put a 12-point Excel spreadsheet on a slide. So you have lost, just consider it, just say, I've lost my audience because that's the effect. Instead, if you're able to articulate the takeaway or visualize the takeaway, then you can explain how you got there. And that doesn't mean you're never going to give, of course, you're going to give people the raw data somehow, right? But in terms of your slides, get people involved by figuring out like what the question was and what the answer was, what the takeaway was, what the trend was. Okay? And then you can dig into the details. But try to visualize that takeaway. By the way, I totally made this up. It was just for effect. Okay. I have no idea if 45% of the US workforce will be permanent remote, but it got your attention. Use infographics if you can. Canva allows you to create infographics. There's all sorts of programs that allow you to create infographics. Just use them. And if you're going to bring in charts and graphs and stuff, think about the tool you're using. It's not just, oh, I love donut charts, so I always use them. No, what are you using them for? What are you trying to illustrate? So pie and donut charts help, I don't know, dessert, can we call them dessert charts? They show large differences. Like if this was sliced into 8 different pieces, it's not going to reveal anything. It's just going to be 8 different pieces of pie. And then bar charts can help show more precision. But the equation I really like is this one. You have your background, right? What tool are you going to use? Donut chart, graph, line chart, whatever. There's all spider chart. There's, all those different kinds. You can take entire courses in learning this. Then what's the data you're going to put on it? Makes sense, right? But here's what we forget all the time. What do you want us to see on that chart? What do you want us to see on that table? What do you want to see in the donut? Right? We forget to guide our audience's eyes to what we want them to see. But only when we have these 3 do we have a result. Here's a few examples. I've used orange to guide the eyes. So in this kind of graph, you're going to be drawn to this column. Well, you're going to be drawn to this side of the pie. You're going to be drawn to the orange line. And look at this, you're going to be drawn to the Q2 quarter column. If you don't tell people where to look, they're going to look wherever they want. And as soon as they look wherever they want, you've lost them as an audience and your message is muddled. So make sure you're guiding their eyes. I don't care if you just use big arrows, guide their eyes. All right, so that brings us to the end here. I'll do a quick summary. We've talked about the keys as being you want to captivate your audience, you want to clarify your message, and you want to give people a chance to say yes to you. And we looked at these 5 areas to help you do that. Develop a strategy, reduce anxiety, we honed the message, we organized for impact, and we talked a little bit about designing slides and principles within this slide design. Here are the recommended resources. There's Duarte, there's Gar Reynolds, there's storytelling with data and data visualizations. I highly recommend these. And with that, I'll just, oh, that's right here. Upcoming in the Writing Lounge, I might as well say this, we have next time evaluating sources for credibility. On June 9th, we actually have a tech takeover, and Wes Head, who's an adjunct professor in the School of Business and deputy CIO at the University of Redlands, is going to help us figure out how to make teams work in teams. I'm very excited about that. And then on Wednesday, June 23rd, it's grammar time. So I invite you all to come by the Writing Lounge And thanks for watching this webinar, and look forward to seeing you in the days ahead.